This is Tom Levecki with Insider Magazine, and I'm here with Jared Kleinert here in New York City, interviewing one of the up-and-coming entrepreneurials, probably the go-to millennial if you're looking to grow and or start up a business. So, Jared, how are you doing today?
Doing good. We got a lot of coffee. We got some water.
Yeah. Absolutely. We have this
all hydrated and caffeinated.
We have all the staples needed for a great interview. So, with that being said, there's a little bit of hard liquor to pour in there between set.
Yes.
So with that being said, I'm really excited to meet with you today. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I guess started my first business at 15, and I like to say I both successfully started and spectacularly failed my first two businesses at 15 and 16. Starting at 16, I worked for two VC-backed startups in Silicon Valley. One was called Learnist. I spent 3 months there, left, and then they raised $20 million, of course. I wasn't entitled to any of that. I was just a measly intern. And then spent 2 years at a startup, enterprise software startup called 15Five, and did everything from becoming an unpaid intern to leading their outbound sales team when I left and helped them grow. They're doing really well now. In the process, at 17, I was named the definition of social entrepreneur by Forbes, which I don't even do too much social entrepreneurial stuff anymore. We can go on that later. And then also when I was 17, I got this idea for 2 billion under 20, which has become my major brand. It was also a book that I came out with earlier this year and a series of companies that I'm starting. So that's the quick backstory. And then if you want to dive into 2 billion under 20 more, we can do that.
We will, but I got to wrap my head around this for a second. At 15 years old, I was still going to the bleachers to look up the cheerleader skirts, right? At 15, you were a intern. Walk us through that. You drop out of school, or did you accelerate high school, or what happened there?
Yeah, I just gave a TED talk about why this is all possible, and turns out that young people have more power than ever before. So a lot of people will say, "Oh, when I was 15, I couldn't have started a business," but it's partially true because we've never had this much global connectivity. We've never had this much access to different problems and the potential solutions as we do now. And with an internet, you have a level playing field to find customers, offer solutions. So it is a completely different world when I was 15 versus when my parents were 15. And, so I had an idea. I tried to solve it, failed miserably, but I learned a lot. And, I keep doing that process pretty much every day from now on. But yeah, and then 16, as far as interning, the biggest mistake I made at 15 with my first company was poor mentor selection. I was actually working with a guy who I found out later had served time in prison for a securities fraud on Wall Street. Okay. It's my first business mentor.
There you go.
And then so to make
it wasn't Jordan Belfort, was it?
No. But he's close in a lot of ways, which I don't even want to go into, but it's kind of scary. But I fixed that mistake when I was 16. I was reading an article in Forbes called "The Most Connected Man You Don't Know in Silicon Valley" about David Hassel, who's the founder and CEO of 15Five, the enterprise software startup I worked for. Reached out to him, offered to work as an unpaid intern in exchange for mentorship, because when you're 16, even if you had one startup, the only thing you really have is your time and your hustle. So I offered that up, and he said yes, gave me a shot, and the rest is history.
So you were living where, Florida?
Yeah, I've always worked remotely, which is another cool thing that we can do now that maybe we couldn't have done in the past. So I was working for two VC-backed startups while in high school. I didn't really care about my grades in high school too much, despite being straight A's up until 9th grade. And yeah, so I was either answering emails with a hidden phone in my class, or I was traveling on the weekends to different conferences, and then I'd come back and be bleary-eyed after landing Monday a.m. and then going straight into class. That was kind of my whole high school period.
Beautiful. Okay, so now I do want to touch on, give us specifically what 2 billion under 20, what exactly is.
Yeah, so 2 billion under 20 at its core is a collection of the world's smartest, most talented millennials. And it first manifested itself in a book that came out in July called 2 billion under 20, How Millennials Are Breaking Down Barriers and Changing the World.
And you're a co-author, obviously, of that book.
Yeah, so I was co-author of that.
Bestseller.
Bestseller on Amazon. Woohoo! And Yeah, in the book, we share the story of 75 world-class millennial talents, from Olympians to tech entrepreneurs, kids who built nuclear fusion reactors in their garage, kids who are curing cancer, So You Think You Could Dance finalists, people that are discovered by Elton John at 13 and now like sing and get book deals and fashion deals as well. Like just the craziest, wackiest bunch of people you can find that were 20 and under at time of writing. Throughout that process, that took about 2 years to do that. So I started at 17. The book came out at 19. Throughout that entire process, we built this online community of the same world-class millennials. And now we're at about 500 people, but have access to a few thousand of them through sister communities and people that we didn't accept into our community, but they're still ambitious and doing great things. And recently, we've started consulting for large organizations to help them better work with millennials in their marketing and their hiring and recruiting and in their employee retention and engagement of current millennial employees. So that's been really interesting, taking the same insights, the same kind of industry connections and different value props from our community and bringing them to really large organizations who just have no idea what a millennial is or how to handle them, despite the fact that this term has been around for like a decade. But it's only now becoming relevant, and the companies that don't figure it out now, by 2020, they'll really be screwed, and they probably won't be around anymore.
Well, that's a great point, because there's 90 million millennials. Millennials make up for 23% of millionaires, so millennials are affluent. Just in the U.S., that's correct. And what about worldwide? So what is the biggest mistake the big brands make where they just don't get it? When you see an ad, you see a creative, you see whatever's out there, and you just say to yourself, obviously they need to hire you, but number two is, what are the biggest mistakes they're making by just not connecting with millennials? What can they do? How can they do a better job at it?
Yeah, so I guess we're sticking in the marketing realm, but I guess, there's no room to sell bullshit anymore. No. We live in a world where all the solutions, there's so much noise. Like everyone has a new widget, everyone has a new solution for consumers' problems. And in a world where there's so much noise, actually the companies that really solve problems, like deep down actually do something positive and solve a big pain point, those are the ones that will be shared by millennials more so than ever before. So a lot of companies are still trying to get by with basic versions or bullshit, and it's totally being sniffed out because we've never had this much access to information, so we can always like fact check people, or we can see that, okay, you're not going to solve this solution, but this company is, and I'm so sick and tired of hearing this random noise, and they're solving my problem, so I'm actually going to champion them for free on social media with all my friends, using the telecommunication and global connectivity that we have now. So don't sell bullshit. Instead, be authentic and transparent and really deep down solve a problem. And you're actually not only going to get more millennials, but you're going to have them become free customer advocates for you.
Beautiful. And then tell us a little bit more about your TED Talk. What was the topic?
Yeah, the talk was called Why Young People Have More Power Than Ever Before. I opened with three examples, but the one that hit home the most was my friend Conrad Farnsworth at 17 developed a nuclear fusion reactor in his garage. For less than $5,000. Okay. And to put this in perspective, in the 1940s, it took the work of 3 governments, 7 years, 130,000 people, and $26 billion by today's standards to create the first atomic bombs. Wow. So 50, 60, or 60, 70 years difference, and suddenly we have the same power now that only governments, corporations, and the super wealthy had just a few generations prior. Wow. So what do you do with that? You could start companies and raise $2 million by 20 years old and hire 30 people in a year, and disrupt an industry like my friend John is. You can start a social movement like Spirit Day, which was picked up by GLAAD and now helps tens of millions of LGBT youth get by and not hurt themselves when they face adversity. So that's huge. My friend Brittany started that, and she's a 2 billion under 20 community member. I mean, we can do things unlike ever before, and a lot of it comes to this entrepreneurial spirit, which you don't necessarily have to be a business owner to be an entrepreneur. You could be an entrepreneur in another company, which I think corporations are getting wrong as well. They're not actually fostering entrepreneurship with their employees. You can also use it to solve major social problems. You can use it anywhere, even in an athletic career or a music career. I think millennials are displaying this entrepreneurial gene, in part because we have to, because there's never been this many problems. But with this exponential rise of problems, there's also more opportunities than ever before.
All right, you bring up some great points. So let's get to who Jared is. What scares you the most? What do you fear the most?
What do I fear the most? I fear being normal. I see this like vicious cycle of normalcy, and I could potentially draw it, but like it scares the shit out of me. And this vicious cycle of normalcy is a mixture of circumstance. What positions are we being put in? It's a mixture of listening to other people's opinions rather than seeking expert counsel. It's a mixture of things. A lot of it is out of our control. Especially like how the economy is going, how different corporations are hiring us or servicing us. There's all these different factors that contribute to this like vicious cycle of normalcy, and I think it's really easy to get caught up in that. The way to get out of it, to me, is like improved consciousness and knowing what your expertise is, knowing how to market yourself, and then being able to like add your passion behind that and really let you get out of that vicious cycle. So this fear of being normal drives me. So that's one of the big things that scares me. And then I guess a secondary one is we have bigger problems than ever before that we need to solve. And I think not enough people are leaving their own silos and working together to solve them. So that's a lot of my work, is trying to get people out of their silos and in collaborative efforts to solve existential crises, really.
All right, so you're obviously a smart guy. You know what you're doing. So you're doing some great things, and you're building a platform, which is fantastic. So talk a little bit about how do you tend to actually monetize? How do you tend to build a strong business that's going to be really profitable for yourself financially, but also from a social entrepreneurship standpoint? Walk us through some initiatives there, so our audience can hear about it.
Sure. So from a personal brand standpoint, I do a lot of public speaking. From TED to I speak to a lot of Fortune 500s. I recently spoke in Mexico at their version of South by Southwest. And then we're also exploring follow-ups to 2 Billion Under 20. But we're exploring follow-ups that don't necessarily work with the traditional model, because I think authors get screwed a lot of the times in the traditional publishing model. Unless you're like a 6 or 7 figure author. Like I used to work with Keith Ferrazzi. He was a former client of mine, and he's a 7-figure author, so he doesn't have to worry about traditional publishing. It actually works for him. But for most of us, it doesn't. So how do you seek other ways to do it? Books and speaking are here. That's for my personal brand. That leads to consulting, which has been a bigger business, and I'll work with large companies again on how do you market to millennials, how do you hire and recruit top young talent, how do you retain and engage your current millennial employees, and I'll provide a lot of the research we've done. I'll also bring in some of the 2 billion under 20 and actually sit them down with corporate executives, run different workshops, run advisory boards, things like that, to get the conversation going and really talk about how do you deep down influence our generation. So, yeah, consulting is the bigger business model, and then working on a few other things that might blow up.
I'm sure you are. Jared's always working on something. I met him a few minutes ago, and I already know he's a gamer. So if you're an entrepreneur watching this, a millennial entrepreneur, what are one of the two, maybe three, what fields, if they're really they're financially motivated, let's say, right? So they're going to always be kind of socially conscious, right? But they want to get into a hotter space. They have a better chance of success for being hot. What are one of those 2 or 3 areas you'd recommend or verticals they should go into?
I mean, we were talking about it before the interview about this idea of social entrepreneurship. I personally want to eradicate the term social and just make that part of entrepreneurship, much like lean startup has become the way to build a startup. Right. No one says lean startup anymore. It's just if you're building a startup, you have to be lean. Right. Social entrepreneurship fundamentally comes down to using an entrepreneurial spirit to solve problems. Correct. So to me, any problem out there, whether it is a clean water problem or whether it's a corporation is losing money because they're not engaging employees correctly, those could be social problems. And if you actually solve those problems and find a way to do it, which isn't easy, but it's the way to build a sustainable business, I think you'll find success. So I think a lot of people are building stuff that doesn't solve problems and just adds to the noise or gets caught up in the noise. I also just think you need to focus on whatever you do. So it's been something that I've been doing lately to try and take whatever I'm working on and try and pare it down to what's really important. So I think anyone you can have success in any vertical, but if you're focusing on solving problems and you actually focus on solving those problems rather than picking up the next shiny object, I think you'll have success.
So pretty much you can make money almost anywhere just as long as you're better at it, you're passionate about it, you know what you're doing. So you're agnostic towards a vertical, just make sure the passion is there. You know what you're doing, make sure you're lean, and then you're going to make some money. Is that essentially what your message is?
Yeah, and I think I would go against the crowd in terms of a lot of people want to raise as much money as possible. I'd rather build something that's revenue backed from day one and only raise money strategically, especially in a market that's probably going to correct itself in like 2017 or so. And that also validates if you're solving an actual problem. And I think there's some spaces that scale more than others. Like obviously the tech world, the startup world has the ability to scale quicker than a very locational bagel shop or even a speaking business. Like I like speaking because it's fun and because I get to like impact people directly, but it's not very scalable. There's only one me, fortunately for everyone else. But yeah, so that's why I try and do things like consulting. There's a few other things that are more in the startup world that have the ability to scale. So I particularly like tech and startups. I'm not a coder myself. I'm not super technical, but I know enough geeks and enough friends who are in that space, right? Yeah. I've gotten it through osmosis, at least some of the terms. Yeah. But yeah, I see that being a great place. One place to think about is just software in general, both in enterprise software. We're going into a world where millennials have just become the largest part of the workforce, so they're going to need new tools to work. So how do we provide those new tools? Also, software for emerging industries. So we have space that's become the next like multi-billion-dollar industry or trillion-dollar industry. There's also AI, VR, all those things. Although hardware-based, are going to need some software too to either power the hardware or run the marketplaces that run that industry. So there's a lot of opportunity there.
Oh, you bring up some great points. So I want to touch on financing for a minute. From your perspective, millennial, say 25, looking to start my own business, something that could be scalable. Do you recommend incubators, bootstrap, getting funding early? You kind of alluded to maybe not liking that. How do you recommend somebody watching this program? What's the best way to maybe seek funding super early on at the seed level?
Bootstrap is the best way to go. If you do that, you'll figure out what problems you're actually solving. And if you're not solving them, you won't get money. Unfortunately, society in general is kind of screwing us over in terms of student loans and in terms of a very volatile economy. It's making it harder and harder for millennials to start companies. So we're the most entrepreneurial generation yet, but if you look at the numbers, I think we're at some like 20-year low in terms of millennials owning businesses, which means larger companies or other startups who have figured it out are actually going to benefit a lot from having us locked down and bringing us in as entrepreneurs.
Beautiful.
But bootstrap all the way.
So best day of your life?
Every day.
Worst day of your life?
Every day.
Love it. So here with Jared Kleinert in NYC. Any parting words, and how can we best find you?
Best parting words is focus. I've been telling everyone that. It's also the one I want to tell myself in the mirror every single day. So focus, focus, focus. And then you can find me, Jared Kleinert, anywhere online. So jaredkleinert.com, jaredkleinert@gmail.com, at Jared Kleinert. You got it.
Tom LaVecchia with Insider Magazine. You heard it here. Jared Kleinert will be the millennial entrepreneur whisperer. Thank you very much.
So many buzzwords.